Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today, presented by Edgile and ServiceNow. We're going to get started. Our webinar today is going to talk about an insurance company case study followed by a demo. We're going to talk about how to accelerate cloud initiatives, improve risk and security capabilities, all while reducing costs. So before we go any further, we're going to do some quick introductions of the panelists and the team that is going to be presenting today. I'll quickly introduce myself and the Edgile team, and then I'll have the ServiceNow team introduce themselves. So this is Brian Risman speaking from Edgile, joined by David Decter and Jay Dial. Myself and David, we're the two practice partners at Edgile that look after our ServiceNow risk and security practice. Jay Dial is one of our lead senior solution architects, and he'll be driving a demo later in the presentation today. At Edgile, we really focus on three things. One is our risk and security practice. That is now completely wrapped around the ServiceNow ecosystem. Myself and Dave and the team, we've been doing this now for nearly 20 years, and we made this exclusive decision to move our business really to partner with ServiceNow, which has been fantastic, really about the power of the platform that we're going to be bringing to life here today. We have two complementary lines of business. We have a cloud security business largely wrapped around Microsoft, as well as an identity access management practice largely wrapped around SailPoint. What's really fantastic is that Microsoft and SailPoint are partners of ServiceNow, and we spend a lot of time bringing those worlds together, with ServiceNow really being at the core and the hub of all the risk and compliance considerations in everyone's environment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan from ServiceNow, who's going to introduce himself and his team, and then he'll get us started walking through some thoughts on digital transformation. Ryan?
Perfect. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're based. I'm Ryan Bennick. I'm the risk and compliance specialist for our financial services vertical here at ServiceNow, cover all the Western region, joined by my technical counterpart, Will Brannon, who you'll hear from in just a little bit when we get to the demonstration. If you want to go to the next slide for me, Jay. So I know one of the things that we're here for today is to talk about digital transformation and essentially what that's doing to every organization in the world. You don't have to look too far. You can look at Bill McDermott, our CEO, to hear about him talking about how we've now reached the tipping point for digital transformation and how imperative it is for every organization to be able to take this new strategy and apply it. No different on this one. Looking at this specific slide, Gartner and Forrester have been measuring governance, risk, and compliance and looking at risk and compliance for the past 20 years. There's been a lot of technologies that have been in and out of these specific quadrants. And one of the things that's really elevated ServiceNow is not only our capability to help our customers with the content, the different use cases that they have, but it's really been powered by our digital transformation and our innovative platform. So ServiceNow as a whole, we are the only vendor in the Forrester and Gartner's Magic Quadrant for low-code, no-code applications. So it gives our customers the flexibility of not only bringing these solutions on, but starting to get all in with their digital transformation and build to their liking. And if you want to go to the next slide for me, Jay. Digital transformation is top of mind for every organization, as I've already talked about. In a survey that was done, 77% of CEOs actually have digital transformation as the priority for them moving forward. And as you can see on this next slide, digital transformation continues to be at an unprecedented pace. And 31% of the operating budgets are dedicated to digital transformation initiatives. This was middle of 2020, so I bet you if you had redone this one, it'd be probably a lot more would be focused on this one, and these numbers would change just a little bit. And on this next slide, you can see that digital transformation is the means to become agile, but it's becoming the new norm. So we're seeing new levels of risk, new type of risks that are coming because of this move to digital transformation. In 2020, we saw the disruptions that this can have. When we talk about the pandemic, we had a lot of natural disasters. You can consider a payroll processor, and in the past that was considered reliable, and they had issues with their services, and there had to be a rapid shift during this time to be able to go into a new business. Not only were customers directly affected, but our customers, our employees, parents, students, families. I'm sure many of you watching today probably still have kids at home. doing Zoom. So this is another move of digital transformation. But each risk management decision is amplified when those impacts have been affected by your customers and your workforce. Next slide for me. We're unfortunately not keeping up, though. We're definitely lagging as an industry, and the push to digital is faster, and it's got to be more responsive. So we have to do more. We need to be able to manage our risks and make our organization more successful. But in order to do that, our risks have to we have to be able to identify those risks faster. We have to be able to respond to those risks faster. And over 70% of people that we had surveyed, or that Gartner surveyed on this specific survey, agreed that we have to do a better job of keeping up with the pace of risks in our environment. And really, if you want to go to the next slide for me, Jay, what we're planning on talking about here today is being able to help you as an organization be able to tackle your digital risk. So be able to perform and build a robust risk program, and not only looking at your programs in the traditional sense, but being able to take insights from other elements of your organization. So one of the things that we do from a ServiceNow perspective, not only are we looking at it from a risk and compliance perspective, but we're bringing in other parts of your organization. So when you think about it from your IT service management, your IT operations management, your HR, your back office, your middle office, we're helping bring all those things together and helping organizations make more risk-informed decisions. And digital transformation will definitely pay off as we start to add in new elements of AI, machine learning, to take us into the next 10, 15 years of this industry. And one last slide I will leave you with is another survey that we did. Of 67% of the CEOs said that acting with agility is the new currents of business, and if we're too slow, we will be bankrupt. So there's a lot of things that we're considering in this move to digital transformation. That's cloud technologies. Many of you are probably grappling with, do we keep our information on-prem? Do we keep our technologies on-prem? Do we move that to the cloud? How are we leveraging these Internet of Things? How are we leveraging new AI and new analytics that are coming available to us? So Brian, I will turn it over to you, sir.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. That was really helpful background to get us going here on, reasons why organizations are embracing and moving and focusing on their digital change. I think one of the things that we need to make sure as part of that digital transformation is really having a robust risk and compliance management program, because what we find is that often those things get forgotten about along the way, and then you have to come back and rework and think about all the things you've forgotten about from a risk and compliance perspective. So really what we're going to set up today for you is a case study. This is about an insurance company who's really going on this digital transformation journey. And as you'll see on the next slide, you'll see really what the business problems are that this organization has been, focused on. We all know, we've all lived through and are living through the pandemic. Digital transformation is accelerating at a breakneck pace for a variety of reasons. A lot of work from home, a lot of cloud solutions out there, cost reduction. We're seeing folks, really lean in on SaaS applications, which is fantastic. Building automation into on-premise applications. This is all really part of the journey to embrace digital transformation. But the challenge that we're seeing is, how do we help organizations build it right the first time, or let's call it move that workload right the first time? And the challenge is about getting the right risk and compliance stakeholders and all of the requirements together so that we can address them right the first time. The first thing that to think about, though, as you'll see on the next slide, is really what are the tough questions that we need to be answering, and these are the questions that the CEOs are asking, the board is asking, auditors are asking, as well as the regulators, and you'll see here on the left-hand side, a couple of the topics, if you will, of what those questions are being, asked, if you will. Really, does the organization fully understand what information it manages? Where is it information? What's the data classification of it? How sensitive is it? Who has access to it? Really, what's that baseline about the data and the workload that we need to be moving potentially to the cloud or to a SaaS application? What are the things that are the crown jewels? What is really critical to business operations? Are we protecting those adequately? Oftentimes, folks can't even, identify what those crown jewels are, and that they're actually protecting the wrong things. So how do we make sure that organizations are really laser focused on the things that are most critical to their business operations? Oftentimes here we're thinking about, vulnerability response, security incident response, and all of the SecOps capabilities, as well as, things from a resiliency perspective, and what ServiceNow is able to provide from business continuity management and the resiliency capabilities that they have. How do we identify the key risks of the business? What are the key threats, vulnerabilities, exposures, and how are we providing real-time accurate information about those risks? So where are we identifying where those risks are? Who owns those risks? What are the activities that they're doing to manage and mitigate those risks? So we need to make sure that we have our arms around the highest and most critical risks in the organization. And then from there, what actions are we taking to mitigate those risks? So how are we reducing, our inherent residual risk by having a proper risk mitigation programs and controls in place and doing that in a timely fashion? And as everyone knows, the compliance landscape today, is ever changing, it's ever growing, it's evolving, and specifically around an organization's cyber program, for example. How are you addressing the variety of regulatory mandates that do exist, if you will? There are hundreds, if not thousands, of global and local regulations that organizations, including insurance companies, really need to be dealing with, and it's an arduous task to go manage those. And through techniques from ServiceNow, through some of Edgile's accelerators, we've been able to help organizations address the variety of compliance issues and challenges that they need to work through. So one of the first things you need to do to go start working through this is really understanding the lens about the different stakeholders that need to help answer those questions that we spoke about on the previous slide. If you're asking just one of these groups, you likely have gaps in the ability to have the correct answer, and you're likely maybe coming back to the table to go rework something that you've moved. So when we've worked on a lot of these digital transformation programs, especially ones that are cloud enabled, when we're moving workloads to the cloud, embracing SaaS applications, et cetera, we spend time working with examples of the stakeholders that you're seeing here on the slide and making sure everyone has a seat at the table and that their perspectives and their view of risk, compliance, et cetera, are all being part of the decisioning and the requirements before something is moved. So the privacy team is going to put a lens on things about the sensitivity of data that's going to be very different than the ethics and compliance team. The supply chain team, for example, is also needs to have a seat at the table just as much as the business continuity management team, who is really responsible for keeping the organization running and having the right business continuity plan, disaster recovery plans in place as well. So what we're going to talk about is a concept of operations and bring to life in a demo in a few minutes, how we can get all of these stakeholder groups working together in a harmonized way in a common ServiceNow-enabled platform to really answer those tough questions that we spoke about a minute ago. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David to get us going on the concept of operations before we jump into the demo. David.
Thank you, Brian. So this is the concept of operations for the decision engine solution. In this case, imagine that the business has a need for a new underwriting platform that requires periodic spikes in compute power, along with massive storage capabilities. This is a perfect use case for a cloud workload. In step one, the business simply goes to the ServiceNow service catalog and portal and clicks the button for a new application or cloud workload. They are then presented with an intake form, followed by a questionnaire to frame the characteristics of the application in step two. At this point, the business logic that's coded into the decision engine now gives the team the necessary inputs to deliver services for the rest of the plan, build, and run activities. As Brian pointed out a minute ago, multiple stakeholders' requirements and the needs that they have are fully then addressed with clear ratings for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. They're receiving the classification ratings as well as guidance on which blueprints to use. From a build perspective, they're able to look at the configuration baselines as well as automate through orchestration the setup and installation of those solutions. And lastly, on point 5, from a run perspective, they're able to achieve continuous monitoring through indicators within ServiceNow IRM, as well as configuration compliance, leveraging security operations. On the next slide, we begin to talk about what the new reality looks like. And this new reality is really a hybrid environment of both on-premise and cloud solutions, frequently involving multiple cloud providers as well as multiple SaaS solutions. ServiceNow really puts a bow around the environment, addressing everything from service delivery to security operations. ServiceNow IRM is used to manage the risk and compliance posture of the environment, while security operations addresses vulnerability response, security incident response, threat intelligence, and configuration compliance. The point here is really that in an increasingly complex environment, having native integration to facilitate getting the right data to the right audience becomes paramount. This concept is further illustrated on the next slide. Within ServiceNow, there's a concept of entities, and entities are really that bridge between the different worlds, enabling the right data to be passed between the different solutions. So on the bottom left, you see your traditional ITSM, ITOM type CMDB, application portfolio management, a variety of repositories to manage service support and service delivery. Then using this concept of entities, you're able to bridge these worlds of integrated risk management, security operations, as well as business continuity and vendor risk, allowing clients to then pass the right attributes and data, making the teams better connected to deliver these solutions and to perform their processes. On the next slide, we're going to summarize some of the value that was created. So clearly speed around faster builds, building it right the first time, enabled through concepts such as baseline controls, blueprints, and baseline configurations. With these closed loop processes, we're able to ensure that the right consultation and fulfillment tasks are completed, improving the quality. And perhaps most noteworthy, the user experience is greatly improved with the business, IT, security, and privacy all having clarity and awareness of the activities that have been completed, as well as those that are still pending before getting the solution into production. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian Risman to frame the demo.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. What we're going to do now is turn it over to Jay Dial and Will Brannon, who are going to get into the system, a live system, one of our demo environments, and bring some of this concept of operations to life for you. So we'll first talk about the decision engine, which is one of the accelerators that's on the ServiceNow store. We're then going to talk about security operations and the configuration compliance capabilities. And then we'll show some of the core integrated risk management or IRM functionality as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jay and Will to get us into the system.
Thanks, Brian. So let me go ahead and pull up our demo environment. And we want to start by looking at a dashboard. So this is a dashboard we've pulled together based on this case study that's trying to show at a quick glance the status of where we are with our migration efforts. So what we have here on the top left is the ability to see the state of all these different migration requests. So we can see some are here in this open state, they're currently being worked. We can see that we've approved a good portion of those already. And then there are a few that have been closed out, having been completed in their migration effort. On the right-hand side here in the migration tasks, we're able to see both those consultations and fulfillment tasks that have been created for these different migration requests. The key difference between a consultation and fulfillment task is that a consultation is expected to be completed in a relatively short amount of time. It's something that we can do to quickly gut check and have a conversation with the business to understand what are they looking to migrate, and is this going to be a problem? And we can kind of get that finger in the air decision as to whether or not we want to progress with this effort. A fulfillment task, on the other hand, is something that usually requires a little more effort. That could be performing a risk assessment or a penetration test or onboarding this application to a number of different services, whether that be our risk and compliance program, our security operations, configuration compliance program, and many others. And so the idea is that those tasks that can be completed in short order, we do those up front before we decide to invest a lot of time, effort, and energy into migrating the solution onto the cloud. Down below in the next kind of 8 different reports here, really just showing a snapshot of all these different migration efforts by the different ratings that we've determined. So we can see there's a smattering of different confidentiality ratings, different data classifications that have been determined for these workloads. We see that there's a split between the integrity ratings between vital and standard integrity. And all of these ratings that we have here and scales are something that can be configured to meet your organization's current scales and rubrics. And so we've got here just kind of key characteristics that help us understand what is this workload and potentially what controls need to be implemented. What sort of builds do we need to use for the infrastructure to make sure that we have the right hardening and compliance posture for each of these workloads. The last report I want to draw your attention to at the bottom here is just a quick report that's showing us all the different migrations by the different business owners. So it allows us to quickly see who is requesting this, get an understanding of which parts of our business are adopting our digital transformation objectives, and where we may be able to target some awareness and be able to branch out to different parts of our business. So while this is a report that's showing us all of our different dashboards, we want to show you what this looks like from the start. So switching over to this portal that we've built specifically for this digital transformation cloud migration effort. As David mentioned, a business member can come in here and request a new workload be migrated. So we'll go ahead and click this, and we just gather a few pieces of information up front. And so we may want to migrate our underwriting service from our traditional on-prem infrastructure to the cloud. The nice thing is we can link this to the business service within the CMDB, making sure that we have that connection between the ITSM, CMDB data, and this kind of effort to migrate into the cloud. The last 2 pieces of information here are who is the business owner and what's a slightly more detailed description for this request. With these kind of handful of pieces of information, we can then start the assessment process. So we have these migration questions, and this is where we start to understand what is this workload and what are all those different ratings associated with it. So what type of business service is this? Well, maybe it's a general application. What type of product is this? Is this a commercial off the shelf? Is this a custom application that we developed for our organization? And what's the hosting model that we would like to be using going forward? And so those are some of the initial questions to help us understand the workload. And then we can start to ask targeted questions around all those different key characteristics. It's worth mentioning that as part of the decision engine, we provide a set of kind of default starting questions. So you're not starting with a blank page that you can then tune for your organization. Oftentimes, there's an effort to work with all of those different stakeholders, identify who wants to leverage this decision engine process, identify what are their key characteristics that we need to identify to help us understand which controls need to be implemented, which infrastructure builds, and what are those follow-on tasks that need to occur. And so with all of that, we can build in that business logic so that as we start to answer these different questions, we can get those different ratings and tasks generated. Now, I don't want to drag you through filling out each of these different sections with all the different questions. So we're going to jump to our claims processing application, which has previously completed those migration questions. Based on the results of those questions, identified a total of 19 tasks that need to occur, 11 of which are those consultations. So we need to have a discussion with our business continuity and disaster recovery team, our integrated risk management team. We also need to involve legal and make sure we understand some of the data privacy, records retention requirements. And it's really making sure that we go out, have those conversations with these different stakeholder groups before we move this workload. Once all of these consultations have been completed, we can then go for approval. And this approval can be sent to the business owner. This could be sent to someone within the information technology leadership team who ultimately is determining whether or not this is a good candidate to move from the traditional on-prem into the cloud. Once that approval has been obtained, that's when we would start our fulfillment tasks. And that could be onboarding to our integrated risk management program, performing those risk assessments, documenting the controls in place. Could be setting up our configuration compliance monitoring. So Will be showing us here in a few moments' time what this looks like, but ultimately we want to be able to keep track of the configurations for the different workload over time. So as part of this process, we start to identify what are the key controls that need to be implemented, what is the different build and configurations and hardening required, and that gets us to a great place from day one. But we need to manage this going forward. So getting into the cloud is just that first step. And so I'm going to turn it over to Will Brandon here in just a moment to walk us through how we start to manage that continuous monitoring aspect, keeping track of those configurations over time, identifying any configuration drift that might occur as we start to adjust our hardening standards, but also as new updates and configuration changes are made. And with that, I will be handing it over to Will, who will take us into the IRM and security operations.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for the time. We're gonna jump in. So Jay mentioned a few things, really critical workflows, and so we could spend a lot of time really breaking down each of these different workflows. One that we felt was really important because when you start looking at things like, I'm going to move certain workloads into a space that maybe I'm not familiar with or I have less control of, begins to become an element of where kind of the configuration management. So from a really understanding, are the policies that I need to have in place on the devices in place? Are we hardened down, locked down, right, from our software perspective the way we need to? So what I'm going to showcase here a little bit is just a real brief tutorial of using the ServiceNow out-of-the-box configuration compliance capability that's along with our SecOps products, and how that marries together with your continuous management, continuous risk and compliance program, tying directly into our IRM solution. So what I'm going to do is just start out kind of as Jay did. I guess there's a theme here, right? Dashboards. So dashboards are really important within ServiceNow, being able to, if the data is there, we can pretty much pivot on it, drill into it, have metrics around it. Other key piece, right? And I think Jay touched on this, but the ability to, for all these dashboards to be interactable. So everything in here allows me to be able to drill into the details behind it. So what I'm looking at here, right, is the idea of I want to identify, what different authority, what requirements do I have, right, that I'm tracking, and what am I mapping to from a compliance standpoint? And you'll see that compliance roll up follow me through my processes here, which is really important. You want to be able to understand, like, there's two pieces that we're going to talk about. There's the workflow around when a configuration is looked at, right? So we've evaluated a configuration and it fails. We need to be able to build a remediation process. So this is very similar to, if you've been familiar at all with our sister product, the vulnerability response, the idea that when we identify configuration drift on a device, we're able to then build out that remediation process, that integrated process flow to get through that workflow. So we're gonna walk through that a little bit. But you can see, right, we've got a lot of different metrics. I'm going to jump into one of our configuration management, what we call test groups, right? So basically this is a remediation group. So what I've done is I've run a configuration scan. We've pulled back data. The nice thing is that we support multiple third-party products to be able to do this configuration scanning. So you can support it through Qualys or Tenable or other solutions, right, that you might be using already, scanning your environment for things like vulnerabilities that can also look at a lot of these config tests, cloud scanning tools, etc. I'm feeding that data in, and what I'm showing you here right now is essentially the working container of how we're going to manage that element. So when we get that configuration drift, what we're doing is we're getting it bundled together in a group through automated workflows in ServiceNow that's really helping us to drive remediation. So here you can see I've got multiple results where I've actually come back on specific, in this case, right, I had Windows servers deployed as part of that workload package. So using kind of a simple example that's pretty traditional. And what I'm doing here, right, is this pulls all of these failures together that are related. So in this case, it's related to a password history configuration issue, right, which ultimately could result in a risk being a compromise of some sort, right, adding risk to the environment later. What I'm able to do, right, is invoke a change ticket through here, right, that will carry all of this data together, right, and allow me to go through my existing processes that I have to work with my stakeholders to remediate this. So this is a really important piece of the puzzle here, is this group, this ability to remediate with our configuration compliance tool. Along with that, we're going to drill into one of these tests here, so I can talk a little bit more about how do we measure this across from a ServiceNow IRM perspective. So when you look at these test results, right? So this is an individual test that ran against a specific host that failed. Right, so it gives us everything from what we expected to see, what we should have seen, right, as well as what needs to be done for remediation, for the remediation side. But it also marries together the ability to look at what authority docs, what governance requirements do I have in place that I'm trying to comply to, and you'll start seeing this compliance score, as well as what specific requirements does this fall under. And so when we jump across here from this configuration test data directly into the IRM-based control, I'm going to talk about real quick how we do real-time monitoring in the environment, both from a control effectiveness perspective, which is important in itself, but also from a risk perspective. So being able to look at a particular control that's being utilized to mitigate certain risk, and how control failures and the fact that I can watch them in real time through the marriage of these two solutions is going to give me that real-time view. So as you look here, right, I've got this concept of the password standards requirements that I have. So that's going to consist of multiple things. But what you see as I go down into my particular standard here is that I'm applying it to particular business components, right? So, might be business units, might be workloads, it might be defined how your hierarchy works. So depending on how you deploy different systems, applications, configuration requirements. And then what's going to happen is it's going to map to all of the different compliance requirements that we care about in the environment. So it's going to take this broad sweep and help you map to, if you're following PCI or if you're following other hardcore requirements, right, from a governance perspective, then you're going to be able to manage this control once and measure it many times. And then what you're going to see here is I've got these controls that I'm managing for this password standard. And you can see in this case, right, I've got a bunch of non-compliant controls. What's really exciting here is that we literally are linking to that configuration compliance product so that in real time, as you're ingesting the configuration scans that are being run in the environment, and in parallel, right, working on the remediation of those items, we're actually tracking compliance and how that control effectiveness is happening in real time by looking specifically at what we call an indicator. So I'm just going to open up this indicator here real quick. What this indicator is doing, and this is a very unique ServiceNow capability, is allowing us to look at this configuration setting, right? So that's required, and the scan details that's coming back. And when I have a failed record, when I have a failed element, right, associated with a specific what we call CI, right, or an asset, an application, a business process, right, your scope, it's going to automatically fail, right, and help me manage that real-time compliance view. The other piece that's really important about this is that it also ties directly to my risk element, because as you can see, this particular control that I have deployed, what we call a control instance on this Windows server, happens to be tracking as well, right, a risk around configuration drift for cloud services. And so what you're able to see, right, is as I manage this control and its effectiveness or ineffectiveness, it's going to automatically tie back into my risk state as well. Now, this is, again, a key component I just wanted to highlight here a little bit today, understanding that if we take the concepts of what Jay went through, which is really important, it's that business process workflow. How do we manage all of the spider web of things that we need to do in order to be able to take that critical business workload, right, and move it to the cloud in this specific example? And then when we start funneling that down into actionable items, right, tying in ServiceNow IRM and our real-time continuous control and compliance monitoring, as well as continuous risk monitoring, it's a really, really powerful key element that you can start to bring together the various ServiceNow solutions for. So with that said, that concludes my conversation for the team. So I guess I'll open it back up to, turn it back over to you, Brian.
Fantastic. Thanks, Will. No, that was great. And, appreciate you and Jay walking us through the system. I think it's always nice to see proof of life in a demo environment. So do have a few questions that have come through, want to maybe take the opportunity to kind of address some of those. Feel free to ask some additional questions, through the Q&A function here as well. So, with that, one of the things I wanted to actually pose to Jay was related to, really what Will was showing as it relates to configuration compliance. And I know we talked about configuration drift. Oftentimes a lot of these workloads are being moved into like an Azure environment or AWS environment and things like that. And these settings are changing as well. So the goalpost actually is moving on us. So how do we make sure that we're able to demonstrate and maintaining that compliance, while also taking and tying back to our requirements or mandates and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it there. It's changing all the time between new features being released, on a weekly basis, it seems. There's a lot of new settings that we need to manage. Furthermore, the laws and regulations continue to evolve, and we end up with new, requirements. So we need to be sure that we're managing it so that we can continue to stay compliant. So making sure we understand where that goalpost moves. And so between monitoring those different laws, regulations, and best practices, performing a regulatory change management type activity where you're updating your hardening guides, you can make sure that you can continue to stay compliant as the different laws, regulations, and best practices evolve.
Thank you, Jay.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jay. David.
I have another question here. It looks well suited for Brian Risman. So it reads, we have similar stakeholders with lots of politics and agendas. What techniques have you found success with to get these multiple agendas aligned?
Yeah, that's always the challenge here, David, is that, we've all worked with, large global multinational organizations, politics exists everywhere. And really, the thing we need to focus on here is aligning everyone and bringing everyone to the table and making sure they know that they have a seat and that they'll be heard. So, a lot of the techniques that we've used early on in these projects are actually, running either virtual or in-person stakeholder meetings where you bring all folks together. I think one of our first forays into a project like this, we brought 9 different stakeholder groups together, and we had over 50 people in a room for a week. And we actually sat there and said, if you are the ethics and compliance team, or you're the GXP team, or you're the SOX team, or the privacy team, what are the things that keep you up at night? What are your requirements? What do you need to know about the data? What do you need to know about the application in order to feel comfortable, with setting your requirements? So, what they did is they spent the first couple of days thinking about it from their lens. But then we got the teams talking to each other, because oftentimes what we found is that they start asking the same questions. So you could see the audit team walking with the privacy team, the ethics and compliance team got talking to the HR team, and next thing you know, everyone starts seeing there's a lot of commonality and similarity. So what we did was first get everyone to the table, get everyone, a seat there, if you will, and then started collaborating together to really get to, an efficient and effective way to get everyone speaking and on board with something that would meet their needs in a harmonized way.
Awesome. I know we have another question that came through, which is one we get a lot. Can I leverage existing ServiceNow CMDB and deployment, or does that have to sit in a unique environment? Will, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can handle that, Ryan. That's a great question, actually. And Ryan's right, we do get that all the time. I think both ourselves at ServiceNow directly and probably the Edgile team a lot. One of the great things about the solutions and the way they're set up, especially in the risk management space and the way that things are architected, is we really try to provide organizations the adaptability to crawl, walk, run. And what I mean by that is there is no such thing as a perfect CMDB. So for someone to feel like my CMDB has to be X or Y right before I can get off the ground, it's really not something that really gets in the way. So what we do on the IRM front is really allow you the ability to leverage both logical and dynamic mappings to things that are within the system. So perfect example I'll give would be, if you look at what I used in the example today, something like a Windows server, right? So if it's a Windows type application, or it's, and pick anything, right? But if it's an application or an asset that is a very tangible element, right, in my environment, very good likelihood, right, your organization has had to procure licensing or some processes happen, right? So we're going to want to manage that type of an asset. So in that case, right, we would be able to dynamically, with our IRM solution, such as what I showed you, point to the CMDB or the source of where that data is and be able to dynamically manage. So when those assets come online or offline, and think of cloud services, perfect example, right? Things are going up and down all the time. Things are provisioned. Workloads might only be out there for a few hours. So it's really important to know that we're managing those things in real time, right? And those controls are still being handled. On the flip side, right, I might have some critical business process that's much more of a logical concept, right, or a logical definition of things that I do. Our product can also support the same way to apply controls to those aspects, or risk, or measure that in a more logical manner, right? Because it's not something physical that I can dynamically watch, but it is a process that's defined in the business. And so hopefully that helps, but that's one of the key areas, right, is really using the product in an adaptable, flexible manner to allow a customer to really take a maturity journey. That doesn't mean you have to be at a 10 to walk up, to start.
Yeah, and to add on to that too, one question we get from customers, or from non-customers, people who aren't ServiceNow customers, is, can I still get the same value out of the platform and out of your solution by not leveraging ITSM or not having any other investments? And absolutely, Jay hit it on the head at the beginning part of this conversation when we started talking about entities and how you can start to map all of those processes back to the different technologies. So we have customers that will start with that, and they actually start with ServiceNow integrated risk management, and then they start to see the value of the solution and the platform and start to grow into those other areas. So that's another piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, Ryan, we're seeing more and more of that these days. We're actually, seeing ServiceNow, really people start their journey with ServiceNow with the risk and security solutions, given how robust they are. We actually joke as well, a lot of folks have this love-hate with their CMDB. Some, have a really fantastic CMDB. Some know there's some work to be done and there's some gaps. So folks say, well, can we move forward with our risk and compliance and security journey absent having our CMDB in order? We kind of joke, the Edgile team here, like we wouldn't have a risk and security implementation business if we waited for everybody to have their CMDB in order. So there's really some smart techniques that you can be using that's really through that entity filter and layer, that allow us to make progress, if you will, and then smartly, when ready, drive that full automation linkage back to the CMDB. So, a lot of really good experience and techniques that we can use as people, take that kind of crawl, walk, run, maturity approach.
Brian, I'll add one more thing that's interesting in that area. I don't know if we have another question, but I would completely agree with you in that respect. I think that it's really important for customers to understand that your journey can essentially begin at any point. And what I've seen, my trend actually, which is interesting, I've been at ServiceNow around 3 years. And my trend here has been interesting because when I started out focused on really the IRM and the security teams, and that's my background as well, I noticed it come together. And I've noticed over the evolution over the especially last year, 18 months, where the security teams are getting a seat at the table for asset management discussions and what's important to the organization. And then beyond that, right, the other teams, business stakeholder groups, right, are getting visibility and views into what's being managed and why, and what attributes are being tracked and why. And really it's helping drive a real rich ecosystem.
Fantastic. No, thanks, Will. I think one of the questions we get asked a lot as well is around, well, I already have my risk and compliance program somewhere else, but there's a lot of this power and great stuff that we're talking about here in ServiceNow. So do I need to completely move that off of an existing, platform, onto ServiceNow? So, Ryan, maybe that's one, that we can toss over to you.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, obviously we're having this conversation jointly with a lot of customers, Brian. So it's a good call out. No, you don't have to. I mean, obviously you can. We'd love for everything to reside, but we have customers that realize some of the benefits, as Will went through on his demonstration with the continuous risk and continuous control monitoring, and really want to start, focusing in on those areas. They've got some other parts of their business that are built out in some of the, the traditional GRC systems, but they just see the power of the platform. They see the power of being able to continuously monitor and set those indicators within their environment, kick off those workflows, be able to have that seamless experience for their end users, because they're already using ServiceNow and in their environment with their ticketing system. So no, you can do this in bits and pieces. It's one of the longest standing things that I've heard in my career back when I was on the customer side, and on this side is the whole crawl, walk, run. It's not any different to start your digital transformation. A lot of people are trying to sprint right now just to keep up, but yeah, obviously you have existing investments, you've got things that are working. Let's not always break those things that are working.
That's right, Ryan. I think that's exactly spot on. I think we're seeing actually this use case and a few others actually as people putting their toe in the water with moving, or thinking about getting off what they're currently doing today, which could be, they've invested in for years, highly political. There's certain reasons why they might not fully move their entire risk and compliance program, but having a decision engine. Oftentimes we're seeing like a findings management, issues management use case as another common use case that folks start, their journey, if you will. You just got to start somewhere. And actually, this is one of the use cases that we're seeing folks kind of begin that journey with ServiceNow, given the power of the platform. And then over time, things work themselves out. They either stay on their existing GRC technology or make that full migration over. Well, this is great, guys. Folks, I know we're running up to the top of the hour here. We want to be respectful of everybody's time. We genuinely appreciate all of you joining us today. Coming up next, though, starting, I believe it's May 11th, there is ServiceNow's Knowledge Conference. So Ryan, you maybe want to spend a minute talking about what knowledge is, and pointing folks in the right direction.
For sure, yeah. So this is going to be the second year that our Knowledge Conference has been completely virtual, just due to the pandemic. But we're looking forward to it. Instead of it just being a 1-week event, we've actually separated this over 2 weeks. So it's the week of March 10th. It actually starts on the 11th, 12th, and 13th, and then following the next week, it's the 18th, 19th, and 20th. And it's sessions that, presented by folks like Edgile. We have customers that are going to be presenting. We also have, other sponsors that will be presenting, but going through, one of the things that I hear a lot is customers always asking about how quickly can I get up and running? How long does this take? Edgile's actually got a customer that is going to be presenting with them on, how quickly they were able to get up in just 12 weeks. I mean, that's remarkable, just the quickness of them being able to get live in that amount of time. But it's a lot of interactions like that. There's actually hands-on labs, there's demos you can be a part of. So reach out to us. You can just look on the ServiceNow website under Knowledge 2021. You can register there. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. Well, Ryan and Will, thanks very much for joining us today, on the webinar. David and Jay, always a pleasure. We appreciate everyone's time, joining us on the webinar. We will be circling back, with the recording, as well as some more follow-up details here. And of course, myself and Ryan and the team are very happy to speak with any of you should you have any questions. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.